When her husband first started leaving the house earlier than usual, Emily didn't think much of it. He had always been responsible, someone who liked to get a head start at work to avoid traffic and organize his day before everyone else arrived. At first, it felt like just another temporary phase, nothing that demanded concern. But that initial thought was short-lived. As days turned into weeks, his departure time kept shifting. First 15 minutes earlier, then 30, then an entire hour before dawn even softened the sky. Emily would wake up and find his side of the bed already cold, as if he had been gone for far longer than she realized. She tried not to overthink it, but the emptiness beside her grew more noticeable with each passing morning. His returns became irregular, too. Before, he always came home around the same time, tired from work but still present, still connected. Now he walked through the door long after the neighborhood lights were already glowing. And even then, he didn't really arrive. His body entered the house, but his mind stayed somewhere else. Emily tried to make conversation, to understand if something at work had changed, but his answers were clipped, vague, almost automated. Long day. Too many meetings. Deadlines. He recycled these same responses over and over, as if he had rehearsed them to avoid elaborating. They sounded like explanations but revealed absolutely nothing. The small routines inside the house also began shifting. He started leaving his keys in different places every day. His shoes were cleaner than they should have been for someone who supposedly spent hours walking around his workplace. His scent was inconsistent, sometimes too much cologne, sometimes none at all, but rarely the familiar smell she associated with him. Emily felt as if she were living with a man wearing her husband's face, but not his presence. His mood worried her the most. He wasn't angry or irritable, he was distant in a quiet, controlled way. He responded politely, but with no depth, no warmth behind the words. It was the type of coldness that didn't cause fights, and that scared her more than any argument ever could. Silence between them started carrying weight, a heavy, unspoken tension neither of them dared to acknowledge. Emily kept trying to convince herself it was work stress, pressure, maybe even a new project demanding too much of him. But she felt an instinctive chill deep inside, something telling her this wasn't just professional exhaustion. This was intentional distance. He was pulling away from her slowly, deliberately, or at least it felt that way. And she noticed every detail, even the ones he thought she wouldn't. One particular morning stayed carved in her mind. Emily mentioned softly that she missed having breakfast with him. He smiled, touched her shoulder, and said, "It's just a phase, love. It'll pass." But the smile never reached his eyes. His hand felt cold, and the sentence sounded memorized rather than sincere. From that moment on, she began paying attention, not because she wanted to, but because the signs were impossible to ignore. The patterns spoke for themselves: his hours, his tone, his new habits, his disappearing warmth. Emily wasn't searching for evidence. It was simply appearing in front of her, piece by piece, forming a picture she wasn't ready to face. Deep down, she knew one truth that kept echoing in her mind. People don't start leaving earlier, returning later, and drifting emotionally without a reason. And whatever that reason was, Emily had no idea yet. But she felt she was getting dangerously close to finding out. Emily didn't consider herself a suspicious person. She wasn't the type to check phones, track schedules, or question every detail. But the changes in her husband's routine weren't random, they were structured, consistent, almost methodical. And once she noticed one pattern, it became impossible not to see the rest. It started with the car. He used to park in the driveway the exact same way every day, right against the left edge. Suddenly, he began parking closer to the right. One day left, one day right. Some days facing slightly forward, other days angled back. It looked careless, but Emily had known him for too many years. He was never careless. He was predictable, orderly, almost obsessive about small patterns. This felt like someone trying not to be predictable. Then came the calls. He stepped outside far more often. At first, he pretended to be checking work emails, but he began holding the phone at a slight angle away from her, as if shielding the screen. When the phone vibrated, even lightly, he'd reach for it instantly, faster than he ever had before. And the notifications always came from unsaved numbers, abbreviated initials, or hidden previews. Emily noticed, even if she pretended not to. One night, the phone buzzed while he was in the shower. She didn't touch it. She didn't have the courage. But she walked past it slowly and saw only one thing. Message delivered. No name. No preview. No app icon she recognized. Her stomach tightened with a fear she couldn't describe. Another shift happened in his grooming routine. Her husband had always been simple. Quick shower, quick shave, nothing extra. But recently, he shaved more often, trimmed his beard more precisely, styled his hair with a product she didn't recognize. She asked about it once, jokingly, and he shrugged it off with a half smile. Just trying to look a bit more professional. It didn't match. His office never cared about appearance. He had worn the same rotation of shirts for 5 years without anyone noticing. So why now? One evening, after he came home later than ever, Emily caught a scent she couldn't ignore. Something floral, soft, unmistakably feminine. It clung faintly to his collar. When she moved closer to verify, he stepped back, almost too quickly, pretending to reach for his briefcase. Her heart hammered, but she said nothing. Not yet. She also noticed that he stopped leaving his laptop on the living room table like he always did. He used to sit beside her, working while she read or watched something. Now, he kept the laptop closed, tucked away in their bedroom, locked with a password he had never used before. Emily didn't need to open it to understand something had shifted drastically. Even their children began picking up on the tension without knowing what they were sensing. Their daughter asked why Daddy never tucked them in anymore. Their son asked why he didn't sing goodnight songs like he used to. Emily felt a pressure in her chest every time she tried to reassure them. How could she convince the children that everything was fine if she couldn't convince herself? But the moment that cemented her fear happened on a Thursday night. He came home late again. Emily waited in the kitchen pretending to drink tea, but really she was watching the clock. When he walked in, he looked startled to see her awake. "You're still up?" he asked. "Yeah, just couldn't sleep." He nodded too quickly, as if relieved she hadn't asked anything deeper. Then he made a mistake. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded receipt before quickly shoving it into his wallet. But Emily had caught a glimpse, a restaurant name she didn't recognize, one far out of his usual commute route. She froze. She didn't ask about it. She didn't confront him. She simply watched the way his eyes avoided hers for the rest of the night, the way his hands shook slightly when he picked up his water glass. And that was when she realized something painful and undeniable. Her husband wasn't just drifting away. He was hiding something, actively, carefully, repeatedly. Emily didn't know what she would do yet, or how far this would go. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was happening, whatever he was doing, whatever he was trying so hard to keep from her, she was done pretending not to see it. Emily had always believed that trust was something you protected, not something you attacked. For most of her marriage, the idea of spying on her husband would have felt ridiculous, almost offensive. But now, every small detail pointed in the same direction, and pretending not to see it was starting to hurt more than the truth itself. She didn't decide to investigate him in one dramatic moment. It happened in layers. First, she started listening more carefully instead of just hearing him. The way he spoke, the words he chose, the pauses he took before answering simple questions. When she asked how his day went, his response used to come naturally, like a quick recap. Now, there was always a delay, as if he were sorting through different versions of reality and trying to pick the safest one. She also began paying attention to his clothes when he got home. One night, he came back wearing a shirt she had never seen before. It wasn't new in the obvious way, not ironed fresh out of a package, not stiff with tags. It was broken in, comfortable, familiar, just not familiar to her. When she asked where it came from, he shrugged. "I've had this for ages, you just never notice what I wear." It was a small sentence, but it stung. Emily remembered almost every shirt he owned, every one she had folded, washed, or complained about. She knew that shirt had never touched their closet before. The second layer of suspicion came through his calendar. One afternoon, while he was in the shower, his laptop beeped on the nightstand. It wasn't open, just resting there, but the sound made her glance over. On the screen, a notification briefly appeared from his calendar app before fading away. Reminder, 6:30 p.m. meeting. No details, no location, No description. Just that single word. Meeting. It wouldn't have stood out if it weren't for one simple fact. He told her he had no late meetings that week. Later that evening, he came home past 9. The excuse was the same as always. Work was crazy. But now Emily had something solid in her mind. A moment she could point to, a contradiction she could not dismiss as paranoia. She didn't confront him yet. Something inside her wanted to be absolutely sure before she said anything she couldn't take back. She decided to talk to someone instead. Emily called her older sister, Claire. She didn't give every detail, didn't accuse him directly, but she described the distance, the new routines, the cologne, the strange restaurant receipt, the earlier mornings and later nights. There was a long silence on the other end before Claire finally asked a question Emily had been avoiding. "Do you think he's seeing someone?" The words hit harder out loud than they ever had in her head. Emily didn't answer immediately. She didn't want to say yes, because saying it would make it real. But she couldn't say no either. Not anymore. "I don't know," she whispered. "But something is wrong. I can feel it." Her sister's advice was simple, almost painfully practical. "Emily, if you really think something's going on, you need proof. You can't confront him with just a feeling. That never ends well. Proof." The word sat cold in her stomach. She didn't want proof. She wanted to wake up and realize she had misread everything. She wanted him to come home, wrap his arms around her, and confess that work had been overwhelming, that he'd been distant because of pressure, not betrayal. But wishes didn't line up with reality. Reality was showing her patterns. Patterns didn't lie. The decision finally came one morning when he kissed the kids goodbye but didn't look at her. He stood at the door, keys in hand, phone already in his pocket, eyes somewhere else entirely. "See you tonight," he said. The words felt automatic, empty. A script. She watched him walk out, close the door and step into the car. She heard the engine start, the tires roll away down the street. Normally, that would be the moment she turned back to breakfast, school bags, and morning chaos. But this time she didn't. Instead, she grabbed her own keys. Her heart pounded as she told the kids to keep watching their cartoon for a few minutes. Then she went outside, got into her car, and waited at the corner where he couldn't see her if he happened to look back. She didn't plan this. She hadn't rehearsed it, but her body moved as if something deep inside had made the decision long before her mind caught up. She followed him. Not closely, just enough to keep his car in sight. She stayed far back, pretending she was just another driver on the road, but every turn he made tied another knot in her chest. At first, the route looked familiar. He took the usual road toward his office district. She almost started to feel ridiculous, guilty even, for doubting him. But then he took an exit he never took. Emily's grip tightened around the steering wheel. He turned away from the business area and headed toward a quieter part of the city, where small cafes and residential streets mixed in strange patterns. It wasn't necessarily suspicious on its own. People took alternate routes all the time. But her instinct told her this wasn't random. Not today. He finally slowed down and parked near a little street lined with trees and discreet storefronts. Emily passed by, pretending not to notice him, and parked farther down behind a van. From there, she had to move on foot if she wanted to see where he was really going. Her legs felt weak as she stepped out of the car. Each breath felt heavier than the last. She didn't want to see anything she couldn't unsee, but she also couldn't go home and keep pretending nothing was happening. From a distance, she watched him. He walked with a different posture, shoulders relaxed, steps unhurried, as if he weren't late for anything, as if he were walking towards something he wanted, not something he had to do. Emily followed slowly, keeping enough distance so he wouldn't hear her, her heart thudding so loudly she was sure someone could hear it. He stopped in front of a small cafe she didn't recognize. It looked cozy, almost hidden, with dim windows and a tiny sign above the door. The kind of place you'd choose if you didn't want to run into anyone you knew. Emily waited, barely breathing, as he checked his phone and then looked up. A few seconds later, someone walked toward him from the opposite side of the street. It was a woman. Emily froze. From where she stood, half hidden behind the van, she could see the woman clearly. Mid-30s maybe, dressed neatly, hairstyle with deliberate care. Not too formal, not too casual, the kind of effort, someone wears when they're meeting a person who matters. Emily's pulse hammered against her ribs, each beat sharper than the last. The woman smiled when she saw him, and he smiled back. That smile was what broke her. It wasn't a polite smile, not the obligatory grin he gave coworkers or neighbors. It was soft, familiar, the kind of expression he used to reserve only for Emily, the smile of someone stepping into comfort rather than duty. Emily felt her stomach twist, a cold ache spreading through her chest. She wanted it to be innocent. She wanted the woman to be a colleague, a client, someone connected to work. But the energy between them didn't feel professional. It felt rehearsed, repeated, lived in. They walked inside the cafe together. Not too close, but not with the distance of strangers. Enough space to look careful to the outside world, but too natural to be an accident. Emily followed at a slower pace, her legs unsteady. She didn't want to enter and confront him. She didn't want to create a scene. She just needed to see, to confirm, to understand what all these weeks of suspicion had been building toward. Through the window, she could only make out silhouettes, his profile, the woman's posture, the subtle lean of their bodies as they sat across from each other. The worst part wasn't what they were doing. It was how comfortable they looked doing it. Emily swallowed hard and stepped closer to the glass. Inside, her husband rested both his hands around a cup of coffee, leaning forward as he spoke to the woman. The woman laughed, not loudly, but in a way that softened her face. Emily watched the woman tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, the motion small but intimate. Her husband reacted with a quiet smile that hit Emily like a punch to the chest. She didn't realize she was gripping the strap of her purse so tightly until her fingers began to ache. Then the woman reached out. Not to touch him. Not boldly, not obviously, but close enough that their hands nearly brushed. Close enough that it felt deliberate. Emily blinked rapidly, fighting the sting in her eyes. She refused to cry here, on a sidewalk, in front of strangers. She forced herself to breathe, to stay still, to stay quiet. She needed clarity, not emotion. She needed to watch. A few minutes passed before something shifted. Her husband's phone vibrated on the table. He grabbed it quickly, too quickly, glancing around before tilting the screen away from the woman. Then he typed something short, almost panicked, before placing the phone face down. Emily took one step back. He wasn't protecting the woman from seeing the message. He was protecting someone else from seeing the woman. That little movement said more than any conversation ever could. Then came the final confirmation. The woman handed him something across the table, a small white envelope. He took it discreetly, sliding it into his jacket pocket as if it were something fragile or forbidden. Emily's breath caught. This wasn't just a casual meeting. It wasn't lunch. It wasn't work. It wasn't a coincidence. It was planned, coordinated, repeated enough that they had a rhythm. Her nails dug into her palms as she fought the urge to burst inside and demand answers. But something stronger than anger held her in place. Fear. Because as much as she wanted to know what was in that envelope, a letter, receipts, photos, money, anything, another thought terrified her far more. If she confronted him now, he would lie. Not because she imagined it, but because he had already begun building a secret life, step by careful step. She could see it now, in the routines, the guarded phone, the cologne, the hidden schedules, the half-truths. This wasn't the first time he had met the woman, and if Emily exposed herself too early, she might never uncover the full truth. The cafe door opened suddenly. Emily jerked back, heart thundering, as her husband stepped outside with the woman beside him. They stood close enough that their shadows overlapped on the pavement. The woman said something that made him laugh under his breath, the kind of laugh Emily hadn't heard from him in months. A knife-like ache ripped through her chest. He placed a gentle hand on the woman's arm. Not romantic, not possessive, just enough to say, "I know you. I trust you. We're connected." Emily felt her knees weaken. The woman walked away first, heading down a side street. Her husband watched her go for a moment before turning in the opposite direction, toward his office route, pretending as if the morning had been normal. Pretending as if he hadn't just met another woman in a hidden cafe. Pretending as if Emily didn't exist between the lies he was quietly stacking. Emily stood still long after he disappeared from view. The truth wasn't fully clear yet. Not who the woman was, not what the envelope meant, but one thing was undeniable. Her husband was living a life she knew nothing about. And whatever he was hiding, he was willing to go very, very far to protect it. Emily drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. The roads blurred into long streaks of gray and muted color. She didn't remember the traffic lights, didn't remember turning onto her street. She only remembered the woman's smile, her husband's softened expression, the envelope disappearing into his jacket. When she parked in the driveway, she stayed inside the car for several minutes, staring at the reflection of her own face in the window. She didn't look like herself. She looked like someone who had just stepped into a reality she never thought she'd have to face. Inside the house, the kids were laughing in the living room. Their voices, bright and innocent, hit her like a wave of guilt. She quickly wiped the corners of her eyes, steadied her breathing, and stepped inside as if nothing had happened. "Mom," her daughter called. "Can we have pancakes for dinner?" Emily forced a smile. "Sure. Why not?" Her voice came out steady, too steady, like someone performing a role they had practiced 1,000 times. She cooked. She cleaned. She helped with homework. She laughed at jokes she barely heard. She listened to stories she couldn't focus on, all while carrying the weight of the cafe scene like an anchor tied to her chest. Every so often, she glanced at the clock, counting down to the moment he would come home. Counting down to the moment she'd have to look him in the eye and pretend she hadn't followed him. When he finally walked through the door, she recognized two things immediately: the smell of that same cologne, and the look of someone who had already edited his entire day into a lie. "Hey," he said, setting down his keys. Traffic was insane. Emily nodded, swallowing the burn behind her throat. "Dinner's in the oven." He smiled, polite, distant, and kissed the top of her head. The gesture felt rehearsed, like someone imitating a husband rather than being one. She wondered if he could feel the stiffness in her body. She wondered if he noticed anything at all. During dinner, he talked about work. Another late project. Another new client. Another fabricated reason to justify hours he didn't spend where he said he did. Emily watched him speak, observed the way his eyes shifted when he lied, how he fidgeted slightly when her questions got too close. She wasn't looking for a fight. She was studying him, quietly, carefully, like someone assembling a puzzle no one wanted her to solve. Later that evening, after the kids went to bed, he sat on the couch scrolling through his phone. Emily stood by the doorway, watching him, feeling the storm inside her press harder against her chest. She finally spoke. "You're coming home late a lot." He didn't look up. "Yeah, work's been brutal. Earlier, too." He paused for a split second before replying, trying to avoid traffic. "You know how mornings get." His tone was casual. Too casual. The kind of casualness that existed only when someone wanted to avoid suspicion without giving more information. Emily stepped closer. "Are you stressed?" "A bit," he replied, eyes still on the phone. "It'll calm down soon." She waited for him to elaborate, to look at her, to give her something real. But he said nothing else. He didn't ask how she was. He didn't ask why she was asking. He didn't sense the distance tightening between them like a knot. That night, while he showered, Emily sat on the edge of the bed staring at the small crack of light beneath the bathroom door. She closed her eyes and replayed the scene at the cafe, the envelope, the relaxed posture, the almost touch. Every detail sharpened into pain. She reached for his jacket hanging on the chair. Her hand hovered over it. She wasn't sure what she wanted more: to know what was in the pocket, or to stay ignorant a little longer. In the end, she didn't reach. She let her hand fall. Not because she trusted him, she didn't, but because once she opened that door, there was no going back. No one seeing, no one knowing. Instead, she picked up his jacket carefully and placed it on the closet hook as she always did. He would never suspect she had even considered it. She moved through her motions quietly, deliberately, like a shadow living inside her own home. When he came out of the shower, he looked at her briefly before turning off the lights. "You okay?" he asked casually. Emily forced a small breath. "I'm fine." It wasn't true. He didn't notice. When he fell asleep, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her mind repeated the same thought over and over. He's hiding something, and whatever it is, It has already started changing everything. She didn't know what the next step was, but she knew that the woman, the cafe, the envelope, none of it was random. And tomorrow she would need to decide whether to keep watching from the shadows, or finally step into the truth, whatever it revealed. The next morning, Emily moved through the house with a strange, quiet determination. She didn't feel stronger, she felt hollow. But inside that hollow space, something new was forming. Not anger, not panic, something sharper. Awareness. If she wanted the truth, she needed to stop reacting and start observing. Her husband left earlier than usual again. Emily watched from the window as he backed out of the driveway, his expression calm, his shoulders relaxed. Far more relaxed than someone constantly claiming to be overwhelmed by work. She didn't follow him this time. She couldn't risk being noticed twice in a row. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table with her coffee growing cold in her hands, trying to replay every moment of the past few weeks with new clarity. What had she missed? What had been right in front of her? She started noticing the smaller things. His shoes had dirt patterns that didn't match the office parking lot. Different shades of soil, tiny specks of gravel, the kind you'd find on residential sidewalks or park pathways, not corporate asphalt. His wrists had a faint scent of something floral that didn't belong to her. Not strong enough to come from the woman's perfume, but strong enough to come from proximity. His shirts had creases in unusual places, as if he had been sitting somewhere unfamiliar, leaning against furniture she didn't recognize. The signs were everywhere. She had simply refused to see them. Around midday, Emily decided she needed help, but not the kind that judged or dramatized. She drove to her sister Claire's house, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly the whole way. Claire opened the door with concern already on her face. "You look exhausted. Come in." Emily did, and for a brief moment the warmth of familiar safety made her throat close. They sat in the living room, quiet, neutral territory. Emily took a breath and finally said it out loud. "I followed him yesterday." Claire didn't gasp. She didn't scold. She just nodded slowly, listening. Emily recounted everything. The cafe, the woman, the envelope, the too comfortable body language. Every detail sat between them like pieces of evidence on a table. Claire exhaled. "Emily, this isn't nothing." Emily swallowed. "I know." "Did he see you?" "No. He has no idea." Claire leaned forward, her expression turning serious. "Then you already have an advantage. Don't confront him yet. Not until you know exactly what's going on." Emily nodded, though her chest tightened at the idea of waiting, of pretending, of going home and sharing a bed with a man who was actively lying to her. "I don't know if I can keep acting normal," she whispered. Claire placed a hand on hers. "Acting normal is exactly how you'll get the truth." That sentence stayed with Emily for the rest of the day. When she returned home, she repeated it to herself like a mantra. Act normal. Watch everything. Say nothing. And so she did. When the kids came home from school, she helped them with homework like always. She cooked dinner. She fixed the broken handle on the silverware drawer. She even folded laundry just to have something to occupy her mind. But beneath the surface, she was studying everything. Every shift, every detail, every clue that might have slipped past her before. And then she found something she hadn't expected. While putting away laundry in their bedroom, she noticed something unusual in his sock drawer. A small, folded piece of paper tucked far in the back, as if someone had pushed it there in a hurry. Her heart pounded as she pulled it out. It wasn't a receipt. It wasn't a note. It wasn't a card. It was a printed appointment reminder. A doctor's office, but not his regular clinic. Not any clinic she recognized. The appointment was scheduled for a date 2 weeks earlier, one of the nights he had come home late and claimed to be stuck in traffic. Emily stared at the paper, feeling her breath catch. A medical appointment. A secret one. Why? She placed the paper back exactly as she found it. Her hands were trembling, but she forced herself to keep them steady. Now there were 2 mysteries. The woman and the doctor. When her husband came home later that evening, Emily watched him with new eyes. His smile was practiced. His explanations were recycled. And everything about him felt like someone performing a script. At one point, he glanced at her with a slightly nervous flick of his eyes, the first crack in his perfect facade. Emily didn't miss it. Something was weighing on him, too. something he wasn't ready to reveal. As they brushed their teeth side by side before bed, he avoided meeting her gaze in the mirror. Emily kept her expression neutral, calm, quiet, the way someone looks when they're not searching for anything. But inside her, everything was shifting. That night, long after he fell asleep, Emily lay awake again, replaying every detail of the day. The cafe, the woman, the envelope, the hidden doctor's appointment, the way he was starting to crack around the edges. Whatever the truth was, it was bigger than she thought, more complicated, more dangerous to ignore. And she realized something unsettling. He wasn't just hiding something from her. He was hiding something from everyone. Emily woke the next morning with a strange heaviness in her chest, a mix of dread and determination. She had crossed an invisible line the moment she followed him to that cafe. Now she was living in two realities at once, the life she showed her husband and the life she lived inside her own mind. And both were starting to collide. Her husband behaved oddly that morning. He moved quickly, grabbing his things with an urgency that didn't match his calm tone. He kissed the kids on their heads, avoided eye contact with Emily, and left the house a full hour earlier than usual. But before leaving, he did something he had never done before. He double-checked that his phone was in his pocket. He patted it twice, almost anxiously, as if it were the only thing holding his world together. Emily watched from the hallway, unseen, her heart tightening. Phones only become that important when there's something inside them that can break everything. After he left, she walked into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, letting the silence settle around her. The doctor's appointment reminder echoed loudly in her mind. Why would he hide something like that? Why wouldn't he just tell her? Why meet a woman at a cafe on the same week of a secret appointment? The connections weren't making sense yet, but they would. Later that afternoon, Emily visited the doctor's office listed on the reminder. She didn't go inside. She wasn't ready for the confrontation that might follow, but she stood across the street watching people come and go, nurses taking breaks, patients stepping out with small bags of medication. She noted the name of the place, the street, the building, every detail. If she ever needed answers, she now knew where to find them. For now, she needed to stay invisible and aware. When she returned home, she found something she hadn't expected. Her husband already there. He never came home early. Not anymore. He was sitting at the dining table, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly together. His head snapped up when he heard her keys in the door, and Emily stopped for a second, taken aback by the look on his face. Guilt, worry, and something else, something deeper, more conflicted. He stood quickly. "Hey, I didn't expect you back so soon," he said, voice slightly shaky. Emily forced a calm tone. "I finished things early." He nodded too fast. "Yeah, me too." She placed her purse down and watched him silently. He wasn't just hiding something. He was struggling with whatever it was. His body language was tighter, more on edge. His hands fidgeted. His breathing was shallow. Something was wrong, not just in their marriage, but in him. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. The question startled him. He blinked, then plastered on a thin smile. "Just tired." But Emily saw the truth behind the mask. This wasn't tired. This was fear. Dinner that evening was strained. The kids chatted about their day, completely oblivious to the tension sitting like fog between their parents. Her husband kept checking the time, tapping his foot under the table, glancing at his phone every few minutes. Emily watched him closely. Something was coming. Some decision he hadn't yet made. Some moment he was trying to control. After the kids went to bed, Emily stepped out onto the back porch just to breathe. The cool air helped steady her chest. She heard the sliding door open behind her a moment later. Her husband joined her, quietly, cautiously. They stood side by side, staring at the dark yard. After a few seconds, he exhaled, long and heavy. He said softly. Emily didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the yard. "Yes." He hesitated. The silence stretched. Then, "Have I seemed different lately?" Her heart pounded. This was it. A confession. The truth breaking through. She swallowed softly. "Yes, you have." He stiffened. His hands clenched. He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself, then said, "I'm just dealing with something. I can't talk about it yet, But I will. I promise. Emily turned her head slightly, trying to see his expression, but he kept staring straight ahead, like someone trying not to reveal too much. She didn't push him. What kind of something? She asked carefully. Another long pause. Then he murmured, It's not what you think. The words were soft, almost pleading. Emily's heart twisted painfully, because people only said that when the truth was close, dangerously close, to being discovered. Before she could respond, he cleared his throat. I just need a little time. And when I tell you everything, I just hope you'll understand. Emily stood still, watching him. He wasn't lying now. She could feel the difference. Whatever he was hiding, it wasn't simple. It wasn't casual. It wasn't harmless. It was something that scared him too. Finally, he stepped away from the porch and walked back inside, leaving Emily alone beneath the dim backyard lights. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold together the parts that felt like they were slowly coming undone. Her husband wasn't just hiding a secret life. He was hiding a breaking point, something approaching fast, something heavy, something that might shatter everything when it finally surfaced. And for the first time, Emily wasn't sure she was prepared to hear the truth. Emily didn't sleep that night. She lay awake listening to her husband's slow, uneven breathing beside her, her thoughts circling like a storm refusing to break. She didn't know what he was hiding. Not fully, but she felt the weight of it pressing closer, as if the truth itself were standing just outside their door. The next morning, he didn't leave early. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table long after the kids left for school, staring at his untouched cup of coffee. His hands trembled slightly. Emily watched him from across the room, waiting, steady, silent. Finally, he looked up. We need to talk, he said. Emily's heart tightened, but she nodded. She sat across from him, bracing herself for whatever would come. He took a slow breath. I've been going to the doctor, he began. For a few months now. Emily froze. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the same white envelope she had seen at the cafe, and placed it on the table between them. It's not another woman, he said quietly. It never was. Emily's throat tightened. The envelope looked too small to hold something so heavy. He looked down, unable to hold her gaze. I didn't want to worry you. I didn't want to scare the kids. I didn't know how to say it, so I hid it, and I shouldn't have. Emily opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a medical report, his name, dates, scans, and a short but devastating sentence her mind struggled to process. Her breath caught. He spoke softly, voice breaking. They think it might be early, something neurological. Memory lapses, confusion, changes. I didn't want you to see it until I was sure. Emily felt her eyes blur, not from betrayal, but from the sharp, painful clarity of understanding everything at once. And the woman, she whispered. He swallowed. She's a specialist, the one handling my case. Emily closed her eyes, exhaling a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. A different kind of grief washed over her, not the grief of infidelity, but the grief of fear, of realizing her marriage had been sinking under a secret he carried alone. He reached across the table, hesitantly, as if unsure whether he still had the right. I'm sorry, Em. I wasn't pulling away from you. I was trying to protect you. For the first time in weeks, Emily finally saw the truth behind his distance, the exhaustion in his face, the fear in his eyes, the vulnerability in his trembling hands. She covered his hand with hers. No more secrets, she said softly. He nodded, tears gathering in his eyes. No more. And in that quiet kitchen, under the soft morning light, they began facing not a betrayal, but a battle, one they would have to fight together.